Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
I really think it's important that the child who's getting therapy experience the joys of childhood, that they
Mhm.
still get to be a child and have fun and be silly and get to enjoy it, even though they are learning and we are targeting goals. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great explanation. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like what stands out to me is that the experiences are really meaningful and authentic for the child. And that really helps to increase that motivation.
yeah. And the reinforcement is a little bit different as well. So, as I mentioned, when I was doing, and it might be different for other clinicians, but I'll just speak for myself. When I did traditional DTT, I was using little edibles or token systems or things, or maybe access to a toy, and they'd have access at the table for a minute and then I'd remove it. But with naturalistic, the reinforcement is embedded into the activity. So if you love water play, you're doing water play while you're working on the goals.
Hi, guys. I'm really excited to tell you about this week's episode. So, this week we have Jackie Zaldua, and Jackie is a BCBA, and she's also the director of our Naturalistic ABA programs at TAG. And I wanted to have Jackie on to dive into this important topic because we often get this question a lot is what is naturalistic ABA versus traditional ABA? And so we're going to talk today about the supports that we offer in naturalistic ABA programs, the recommendations that we have, goals we work on, and what it really looks like, and bring this idea to life. So another important topic that Jackie is going to share about is our community events. And in these events, we include our clients in the planning process and the event itself, and we allow them to invite their family, the community, could be other extended family members or friends to participate. And they're just so much fun, and they bring so much joy and connection. And we're going to include some of the pictures in the social media posts and also in the video version on YouTube. So hopefully you can check them out and see what they look like. They're pretty awesome. Definitely highly recommend for clinics out there to consider community events as an opportunity to work on goal areas. It's really meaningful and families really appreciate it. So I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, we're going to get started. I am very excited to talk about this very important topic today. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest first, and then we'll dive in. So today we have Jackie Zaldua. She is the Executive Director of Behavioral Therapies at Therapeutic Approach to Growth in San Diego, California. She is a board-certified behavior analyst, a certified crisis prevention intervention trainer, and is currently earning a second master's degree in professional clinical counseling. And for over 20 years, Jackie has supported individuals with autism and their families using a compassionate, developmental, and family-centered approach. She's especially passionate about mentoring other clinicians in using naturalistic, trauma-informed, and neurodiversity-affirming practices, always keeping the child and family at the heart of her work. So welcome, Jackie.
Thank you, Brooke. It's great to see you.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait. Today, we're going to be talking about naturalistic ABA. And if there's a different kind of term or any kind of term that maybe I misspeak about, feel free to correct me. I'm excited to learn from this topic. And I know you and I have had many conversations over the years as well. But I know this field is evolving, and we're going to talk about all things related to naturalistic ABA. And one thing I really wanted to just kind of kick off our conversation is, how does this type of ABA differ from more of that traditional kind of discrete trial ABA we used to do many years ago? I know I started in the field doing
Right.
discrete trial ABA, and
Yep, I did too.
it's evolved a lot since then. So go
Oh,
ahead
yeah.
and share just a little bit about how that has evolved and what is naturalistic ABA.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm in the same boat. I did traditional DTT many years ago when I started out in the field, and it has really evolved quite a bit. So the term is Naturalistic Developmental Behavior Intervention, NDBI, but we can say Naturalistic ABA. That's usually what I say, just a little more casual. And it's basically the child is an active participant in the program. And so you're following the child's lead and you're really interested in observing what is motivating for the child. What are they interested in? You're using their everyday natural routine. So with traditional DTT, when I did it, I typically did it, it was table time. So we'd be at the table and I'd have flashcards and have my little Skittles or M&Ms or little token systems and reinforcers. And it was very structured. And it was something that the BTs, behavior technicians, were specifically trained. There was a whole structure that you were trained how to do with, mass trials, block trials, random rotations. It wasn't really something parents were trained to do. So we were, I would work privately in a room one-on-one with the child, table time. But naturalistic ABA is, and you can combine the two. So it might even be that a clinician does the traditional and maybe the parents or the clinicians also do naturalistic. So it doesn't have to necessarily be one or the other. But I really am passionate about the naturalistic ABA because my background is also, my first master's was in educational psychology, early childhood education. Big emphasis on the value of using a developmentally appropriate, practice when you're working with children. And so to me, it just is a natural alignment of that as well, doing the naturalistic ABA. So you're doing things like, so let's say, so ABA is the same in the sense of you do an assessment, you create goals for the child. Now, how you work on the goals can be flexible. And so you can use things like baking. If a child likes to bake, cookies or brownies or cupcakes, you can create an activity where you're targeting goals through that, or gardening, or art, or sensory play, or playing in a pool, bath time, story time. So you're using activities that are interesting for the child, that the child is already naturally motivated to participate and to target the goals. And then the parents can also generalize that. They can, I call it the Sesame Street approach. So let's say you're targeting colors and you're teaching a child their colors. Maybe you're even using discrete trial and you're teaching, red and blue. Maybe you then have a theme where you're wearing red and blue clothes and you're really talking about that, or you're making Jell-O that's red or blue, or you're, making cupcakes and putting red or blue frosting, and you just start, or art projects, for example, or little songs that have to do with that. So you're really using that. And I really think it's important that the child who's getting therapy experience the joys of childhood. That they still get to be a child and have fun and be silly and get to enjoy it, even though they are learning and we are targeting goals. So,
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great explanation. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds like what stands out to me is that the experiences are really meaningful and authentic for the child. And that really helps to increase that motivation.
yeah, and the reinforcement is a little bit different as well. So as I mentioned, when I was doing, and it might be different for other clinicians, but I'll just speak for myself. When I did traditional DTT, I was using little edibles or token systems or things, or maybe access to a toy, and they'd have access at the table for a minute and then I'd remove it. But with naturalistic, the reinforcement is embedded into the activity. So if you love water play, you're doing water play while you're working on the goals. If you like art, you're doing art while you're working on it. And so it's a little bit of a different approach, but it's very enjoyable for the child.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're not using those external reinforcements that they receive after they've participated in the skill.
Right.
Their motivation comes from the experience being meaningful and authentic to them. And that's going to drive that participation.
Because you're observing what the child is interested in. That's the developmental piece as well. And you're embedding that into the activity that you're using to target the growth, the learning.
I love that. And that's a great option for families that don't necessarily want to have external reinforcements as part of the child's program. Some families don't.
Right.
And that provides that opportunity for them to access the support without having to have external reinforcement.
Right. And even when we praise a child, we're very careful that I encourage people to be mindful of how they praise. So it could be, wow, look at all the colors that you used, or, oh, you really worked hard on that. You took your time. I really focus on effort as opposed to perfection. And I think that's also really helpful as well, because
Mhm.
we want the child to have a growth mindset and to focus on effort and trying and learning, which promotes them, wanting to continue as opposed to, I have to be correct, I have to be perfect. So we encourage parents also to celebrate growth, celebrate effort as opposed to necessarily perfection.
Oh, I love it. Can you share, you mentioned the word growth mindset, and I talk about that a lot on the show, but since you mentioned it, can you share just a little bit about what your take is on a growth mindset or some examples of how you support a growth mindset with your clients?
Right. Well, for me, I think it's really important to, if a child is ready for this, you have to meet the children where they're at. But if they're ready to participate in creating their own goals and being aware of maybe there's something that's meaningful for them, it's helpful to have an awareness of this is what I'm really good at, and this is what kind of hard for me. I'll give you an example. I had a client a while back and we modeled, like I modeled growth mindset for him in my own life. And it's kind of a funny story, but I have a picture saved. I'll have to share it with you, Brooke. Maybe you can even add it to the podcast.
Sure.
But it's a funny story of my first attempt at making a pumpkin pie a few years ago. And I was just kind of tired that day. And I had, after work, I had made my first pumpkin pie. And I thought I'll just take a quick cat nap on the couch. I thought I was going to fall asleep for maybe 15 minutes. Well, I knocked out for like 4 hours straight while the pie was in the oven. And so needless to say, I'm surprised the fire alarm didn't go off, but I woke up to smoke and I looked and my pumpkin pies looked like tar. I mean, it was just bubbling black tar. And it was funny because I shared it with a family member and they made a comment like, well, maybe that's just not your thing, baking. And I said, oh, no, growth mindset. I got to model this for my clients. I took a picture of it. And then the next day I went and bought the ingredients and did it again. And it came out much better. So I would share this with some of the clients if they did something or they tried something and maybe they failed or they didn't quite hit the mark the first time,
Yeah.
not to give up. That, we have a growth mindset. We don't give up. We keep, the more that we practice, the better that we're going to get. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to grow.
Right.
And so there was a client at TAG that I shared this with, and he actually had a goal of, he wanted to be able to make a goal kicking a soccer ball. So that to me, I mean, that wasn't really meaningful for me, and it wasn't really something that I wanted him to do, but it was meaningful for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we valued that. We valued that that was important to him. And, thinking about now that I look at it, it probably had some social value for him as well, because to be able to go to school or be with peers. And so there was meaning for him in his life.
Right.
And so we talked about, well, let's talk about that. How can let's make that a goal, but what are the steps? And so he would collaborate, and he was in middle school at the time. So he had the language to be able to do this. And we talked about practice, he'd have to practice a certain number of times a week. And then he would self-monitor and reflect on, was he following through with the practice and how was he doing? And he did start making the soccer, making the goals, and that kind of generalized to other things. Then he joined a surfing camp and he learned how to surf, and then he learned how to play baseball and he joined a baseball team. But it kind of started with that of, that growth mindset. And a lot of times we see children who they focus on being perfect, and that causes them to avoid challenges. If you can develop a growth mindset and you can participate in creating your own goals, creating a plan to work on those goals, monitoring and reflecting, which is part of ABA, is self-monitoring and self-reflection of how did I do? What do I need to adjust? Am I being consistent? And then, you start to see the growth. And so that's a very healthy skill to have throughout the lifetime. As you go into high school and you become a young adult, you won't be so emotionally crushed if you fail, so to speak, or you don't hit the mark. You can pick yourself up and say, you know what? I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to, work at this. And again, you have to have a balance of, in terms of deciding what is meaningful for you and what's worth continuing to work at. But it's just a great example of the pumpkin pie, and then the student that, was able to make a goal, soccer goal.
Yeah, well, I think that whole example is so great because you modeled it for your client, and I love that you explained that part of it because you took the pressure off of the client to feel like you have
It was a we do approach for sure.
definitely, yeah, and that you were willing to share that mistake that you made, and that learning that you gained from that experience and that you didn't give up. And, that was such a great way to teach, and to give that opportunity to that client. And what a beautiful example of how that one moment in activity led to so many other things.
Yeah, I know. It's exciting. And to this day, I mean, he's now a young adult and he's, mentoring people and surfing, and it's pretty exciting.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's so great.
Yeah.
A great example. So I want to make sure we talk about some of those core principles and the strategies. I know you've mentioned some of the strategies so far, but maybe you can kind of spend some time talking about the strategies that you use in these kinds of programs.
Well, some of the core principles are, for one, it's child initiated. So at that example I just shared, even like, for example, last Thursday, I had shared a video with you of a client that we made puffy chalk paint. And he loves multi-step projects, and he's now in middle school. So we want to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate and the level of challenge is just right? Because if we give him something that's too basic, it's not meaningful for him. It has to be the right level. So this was like a 12-step activity where we had to grade chalk, we had to scoop flour, we had to pour dish soap, we had to get shaving cream and water and mix it and then funnel it into a squeeze bottle. And then we did it across multiple different colors. And then he was working on safety skills. So even like grading with the grater, like if he got too close, he was problem solving. And then he got a rolling pin and hit the rest of the chalk. And so that is a child-led activity where we knew that he likes doing these, more complex art projects. So I was searching Pinterest and found this, and he was focused for 90 minutes while we targeted about 10 different goals.
Wow.
Things like communication, following directions, following a sequence, safety skills, perspective taking, sharing emotions, all of that was targeted throughout this hour and a half. But again, child-centered, child-led. And when I say child-led, there's a balance. It means it doesn't mean I'm following the child around and doing everything they do. It means that I'm taking their interests. I'm aware of what's meaningful for them, and I'm taking that into account. So I came prepared to the session with the materials and ingredients. And then we invited him. I showed him a video of what we were going to do. I invited him, but it was child-led. And then I know this is probably going to be a good fit to target these goals for him based on his interests. Also, the learning, it occurs in the natural environment. So it happens, and if it's in the clinic setting, we try to make it as natural as possible. So it has more of a homey feel, less tabletop with flashcards and more hands-on. So I like to do things in the garden with students, or, baking or making popcorn or doing art or I love pretend play with puppets with children and, being silly and working on, emotions or requests, or, I'll have a puppet, for example, who will make blueberries with blue Play-Doh, and I'll use a silly voice to say, more blueberries, please. And then we'll kind of do this back and forth with the child asking, which is called manding. He's asking the puppet, say more blueberries, please, because it's so silly and fun.
Yeah.
And so again, the child is joyful. They're laughing and they're having fun. I have videos of me doing this with a client where I'm using this real silly, almost like a Cookie Monster voice, like, blueberries, blueberries, please. And the child is just laughing, but we're targeting language and trying to expand his utterances to full sentences. So then I'll say, let's use full sentence to say more blueberries, please. And, it was just really fun. But again, they're laughing. And so it's naturalistic. We're using natural environment, hands-on materials. We're using positive reinforcement again, but it's more of like, as opposed to tangibles or token systems, we're using praise that's meaningful or the activity itself. And then the goals that we target are very meaningful, like they're developmentally appropriate and they're functional. So it's things like communication, self-advocacy, following a routine, learning how to get dressed or how to brush your teeth, things that are meaningful. And I think also Naturalistic ABA is moving in the direction of using less of a cookie cutter approach for goals, and really also in collaborating with the families to find out, what are you interested in? What is meaningful for you? Are there any areas that you would like for us to target? And the clinician, there's a collaboration because there might be goals that maybe the child is not ready for, but at least we can maybe work on the precursor foundational skills to get them ready for that in the future.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, since you mentioned the caregivers, let's talk a little bit about what the role of the parents are in these naturalistic ABA programs.
Yeah. Well, kind of like what I mentioned before, when I did traditional DTT, the parents really stood back because there's so many steps. We wouldn't have really wanted the parent to be involved in that, but because there's too much of a chance for error with that of not following it down to the T. But with naturalistic, it's very much something that parents can participate in. I really encourage parents to participate in part of the session. Sometimes due to work, they're not able to, but at least maybe doing a couple of Zoom meetings a month where we're reviewing with them the goals that they would like to work on. What I do when I'm working on parent goals is I look at the child's treatment plan and I look at their goals for communication, their goals for social skills, their goals for behavior. And I'll try to pick one goal that I can see the parent working on with ease, nothing too overwhelming or challenging, something that I could see them naturally doing in their routine. And I'll pick one from each category and I'll check. Sometimes I'll even ask the parent, are there any of these goals that you would like to work on? And then we teach them, like we'll model for them. Like we could do it during the session where maybe we are making cookies together and we're showing them how to work on that goal through cookie making or through going for a walk together. So I think it's really important for parents to be involved, even something like bath time or story time right before bed, of getting into a routine where, hey, this is something I'm doing with my child anyway. I read stories with them every day, once a day. We have story time. Okay, well, let's see how can we use that story time to work on, labeling actions or labeling colors or predicting what's going to happen next or discussing emotions.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of fun ways that parents can participate. Even getting dressed in the morning is a great way. You can work on making choices. Like, oh, I wonder if you want to wear the blue socks or the red socks, and pausing, teaching parents to pause and to give their child processing time. I also think a really simple thing parents can do is just narrate to help build language and awareness, emotional awareness, contextual awareness, but just narrating what they see their child doing, narrating what's going on in the environment. It's a very simple thing that they can do to help build their child's receptive understanding of language and their self-awareness.
And when parents are working with you, are they then, when you're having your meetings and you're reviewing their progress and their updates on how they're doing with working on those goals, is that how you're supporting them?
Yeah. We meet and we'll check in on how are things going, what's going well, are there any challenges that you're experiencing? And we'll do it together. And really, even though right now we're talking a little bit about early childhood, I also have clients that are in their 20s that I work on. And it's a similar idea, but we adjust the activities in a way that are meaningful for them as well. So maybe the cooking activities are a little bit more complex or the art projects are a little bit more sophisticated, but it's still the same idea. And the parents are actively participating and involved in the process. And we're reflecting together during our Zoom meetings or in person on, what are the breakdowns and how can we support, how do we make little adjustments to support the child's success? And how do we read their cues to know, like, for example, I have a client that I was working with last week and he'd had a long day and we were working on goals through an art project and he's in a wheelchair and he's non-speaking, but he was showing me like he was actively engaged for about an hour. We were targeting goals and I was modeling for the caregivers. And then at a certain point, I just saw his body kind of drop and he kind of jerked his head back a little bit. And I'm very attuned to the nonverbal communication. He'd been actively engaged. He was enjoying it. And then he just kind of ran out of steam.
Right.
And that was my cue to say, and it's great modeling too, to say, to narrate, oh, it looks like you're getting kind of tired. Had a long day today. Maybe we can switch gears and let's go outside and get some fresh air and some sunshine. And one of the goals we were targeting the goals through gardening and just picking some vegetables And then we ended our session a little bit early because he clearly needed a break.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to be, attuned as well to the clients and recognizing their nonverbal communication and their energy levels, their regulation, and how much challenge they can handle.
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I'm glad that you shared that. And what I love about the caregiver part as well is that it's really focusing on empowering the parents
Yeah.
and hearing what's important to them and also including them in the learning journey and modeling for them in a way that sets them up for success. And I think that's so important. And I just encourage that so much for families to be involved in their children's therapies and to learn. And really that's when I see the most growth. So when families can carry over, what the therapists are working on and to really, be empowered to do so. So I think that's what.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really important. And not just the parents, like it could be other people on the child's team. It could be the teachers, the speech, OT, extended family members, grandparents, nannies.
Mhm.
So we work with everybody. It's and again, we meet the family where they're at. So, if they want other people to be involved, we're flexible. If they just want to keep it, with the parents and the family, that's okay too. But the parent I was just talking about, they have a nurse that comes to the home to help, and she's there full time during the week. So her and I have been working really well together because I'm training her as well, because
Mhm.
she's a caregiver, and it's been wonderful just to see how we can use natural activities to support goal progress.
Right. That's so important, and what a neat experience to support, that many professionals, that it
Mhm.
really creates a collaborative experience amongst
Very
the team.
collaborative. Yeah. And I'm open to their feedback too, because I learn from them as well.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to talk about community because I know that that's important to you and creating community experiences and community events. And I want to make sure we talk about how we can incorporate community in this type of approach.
Yeah. Well, that's just something that is very organic to me. Years ago at TAG, I remember working with different clients, and there was one in particular, kind of just happened spontaneously, and then it kind of gave this momentum. But he really loved food, and he loved eating, and he loved cooking. And so I started targeting goals with him through cooking. Like we would make hash browns and sausage, and we started getting more complex over time. And then when his dad had been in the military, when his dad returned home, they started doing a lot of cooking together, and it was things like chicken adobo. And I remember we had it was really centered around this one client, but we had our first community event where we invited all the people in the building, and everybody invited the staff invited people, and we invited all the clients. And you remember this, Brooke, but it was really exciting to see the turnout and how many people showed up.
Right.
And it was such a meaningful experience for this student and his dad and his mom. And we gave him a chef jacket, and, it was really exciting. But it was very energizing. It was I just remember the tears that the mom had, the hug that she gave me, the pride that they felt to see what their son was capable of doing, even though he was a limited speaker and he was using an AAC device to communicate, that he could basically put on this event where he was creating, it was almost like a catered event where people were coming and standing in line and buying food from him. And it was chicken and I think it was chicken and rice and, a muffin and a drink and a dessert. And so, from there, we were doing things like there was one event that we had, it was a Memorial Day art fair, and that was really special.
Yeah.
And that was more of a group of students, so the BCBAs and the supervisors and the students who were able to communicate. We would get at a round table, and for about 2 months, we planned an art festival. And we had to go really slow. Like I could have probably planned it in a week.
Right.
But because we had the students planning it, it was like a 2-month process where we were working on goals, perspective taking, initiating, communicating, given, conflict resolution when they'd have different ideas. How are we going to decorate for this event? What are the colors going to be? So they spent months like creating their own decorations. We didn't buy a lot of decorations. They made them. What are the games going to be like? And so we had a carnival. And so they were literally painting, like they were getting vegetable cans from home that were used. And then they were painting them and peeling them, painting them, decorating them. They were making their own snacks. So some were making Rice Krispie treats, some were making popcorn and putting them in bags. And so it was like a carnival art fair. And then one child was able to get their dad to bring a big speaker. And we had like a microphone and a stage outside that was created. So there was definitely a sense of community with some parents participating as well and helping with the snacks and some helping with the music and the microphone. And some of the students wanted to bring their instruments. So one played the keyboard, one brought a ukulele, and brought that. And then everybody of all different levels did an art project. So some of them were really grand and some were, like 3-year-old level of just very simple. And it didn't matter. It was about celebrating each other and creating an opportunity for community, for families to come together and to celebrate the art of the students. And I got so much wonderful feedback from the parents. I mean, some were crying, some were thanking me and saying, Jackie, our other children, they have events to go to where they're celebrated. But my other child with special needs, there's just not a lot out there that we get to go to where we can invite grandparents and aunts and uncles and neighbors. Right. So people were inviting like the grandparents and the neighbors to come. And the energy was just incredible. I mean, we had the whole clinic, every room had different art things so they could go in. And then there was, hot dogs and it was like Memorial Day food and everything was a theme of red, white, and blue. There was games and, then we did one that was a Renaissance style and we all dressed up Renaissance style. I was like Robin Hood, my dog dressed like little Robin Hood, a little dog. And that was really fun. And we had one student who had pretty much graduated from the program, was doing really well, has gone off and gotten a scholarship and is in college now. But that was kind of his graduating moment where he got to give back. He dressed up in a full costume. His parents bought it for him and he was able to give back. And it felt, because we still stay in contact, but the mom said that was a really important moment for him because he knew that he had some struggles developmentally growing up as a child. And you guys helped him, you supported him, and now he had a chance to give back. So he was dressed up in full costume and he was playing with the kids and doing games with them, and he had come full circle. Right. And it was really beautiful. We still have those memories.
Yeah. They will always remember them. I mean, I will always remember them. They were such special experiences.
Very special. Yeah. Even the holidays. I think it's very important to use the holidays to target, because those are very meaningful for children. Things like, even if you don't formally celebrate them, like I don't formally myself celebrate Halloween, but I do it with my clients. I'll dress up and I'll create activities for them because it brings community together. And the families love it. They get a chance to celebrate it in a way that we accept their children. If they have a meltdown, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We're here to help. It doesn't matter. Yeah. And it's a safe place for them to come and enjoy the holidays. During the winter holidays, we've had a really amazing art, what was it? Not an art festival, but it was a craft fair. And we had adult students that had made aprons and sewing goods, some that had succulents, some that had photography. And that was probably one of our biggest events. I think that was 2 years ago, where I was even surprised, like how many people showed up. And
Yeah.
then we had a student from Mexico that came and was selling his purses tote bags that he makes, that beautiful designs. And it was very, very meaningful to see the energy and the community and everyone coming together and the students feeling that they're a part of something.
Right.
So they're working on things in a naturalistic way behind the scenes, but then they come together and it comes full circle. And then the community piece is so important. Our students, we don't want them to be isolated. We want them to feel like they belong. They're connected.
Yeah.
They're cared for. They're celebrated, and just the way that they are, we celebrate them.
Yeah. I think that's so important when we think about quality of life, and what brings us joy and fulfillment in life, and that we want that for our clients. And, those are such key things of having meaningful relationships and feeling like you're part of a whole, that you have something to contribute and that you have value. And those events certainly created opportunities to send that message to all of our clients.
Yeah, even I have like a few things that I've done with clients where, it was very personal to them. Like I like puppets, and I had a client, a family that they also did. They were big puppet. They liked the Muppet Show and all of that. So we kind of bonded over that. And then we all liked the Grinch. And so I was targeting goals with them. So like conflict resolution and perspective taking using the Grinch as an example. And we ended up making Grinch kebabs with, little grapes and the little banana and marshmallow and the strawberry. And so you have a little skewer and you make the Grinch kebabs. And then we made ornaments that looked like the Grinch. And so to this day, I mean, that was like many years ago. I want to say it was like 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. They still do that tradition. Like mom will still reach out to me and say, we still do that during Christmas. We'll make the Grinch kebabs because it was such a special memory back then of their childhood, and it was a positive memory. And what she had shared with me is, my child has negative memories of trauma from things that they've experienced in school due to their challenges or diagnosis. But you created a healing place of memories where goals were targeted in a way that was, there was connection, there was fun, there was respect.
Yeah.
And it created some good memories too, which is, I think, so wonderful to know.
I mean, in rituals now, it sounds like it's a nice ritual now that they have to look forward to every year, and they can think about all those years they're participating in that activity, and the memories. So that's really significant. I'll never forget the last thing I'll share about this is the snowmaking machine and the snow coming out and you dancing in the snow, and it was just such a magical moment when we got that snowmaking machine, and the kids just loved it. I mean, that was just such a blast. We didn't know.
We bought the fake snowballs, so they had the snow, but then they had the fake snowballs, and they were and we had one of the staff, her husband, dressed up like Santa Claus, and I remember doing for one of the events. He pretended he had collapsed, and he was in the OT room and on the mat, and all the kids came close to see him, and he had piled up a bunch of the snowballs, and he started, throwing. But a lot of the kids, they had never got to visit with Santa Claus before because the mall was just too overstimulating for them. So we've had Santa Claus come for the past few years, and the kids get to, meet him, and that's really fun too.
Yeah, it's a special memory for sure. What advice would you give parents that are just starting out with Naturalistic ABA?
I would probably say, it's really important to get to know your child. And what I mean by that is start to notice things maybe that you haven't noticed before. So notice, what do they like? Look at their nonverbal communication, if they're not able to verbally tell you, but tune into them. Notice what they like. Do they like water play? Do they like movement? Do they like art? Do they like, sensory? Trampolines, kind of get to know that, because that's going to give you a lot of insight into these are some of the activities that we can use to create opportunities to target, growth and learning. So that would be one. And I think also just not overdoing it. I think parents, you need to not target 10 goals at a time. I think that's a recipe for burnout, or it's too much pressure. But if you can pick one or two areas to start, and just start with that. And, work collaboratively with a clinician and a BCBA, and let them know, I'd like to join in. I'd like to participate. What's a couple of things that I can do that are doable? And, I think that's a really important thing. And then just notice growth. So we don't look for perfection. We're just noticing, look for baby steps, look for anything that's showing signs of growth and celebrate that.
Yeah.
And I would say really have fun. And, I would also say get to know yourself. What are the things you enjoy?
Hmm.
Like I enjoy decorating and I enjoy holidays. And so somehow I've been able to, and I enjoy art too. And so if I'm really authentically enjoying myself, the kids pick up on that too. Now I make adjustments and I try to have a balance of what they like, but sometimes it's mutual where we both like the art or we both like dressing up for Halloween and, doing fun activities. And so the kids, you want the kids to see you having fun as well during the activity.
Yes.
That connection is really important to see like, wow, mom and dad are being silly. We're having a pillow fight or we're pretending that we're traveling on the couch cushions to outer space and they're sitting with me on the couch cushions and while we're, pretending and working on, some of the goals that way. But I think that's really important. Have fun. Let them see you having fun.
Yeah. Great. That's great advice. And I know that I wanted to make sure we talked about how the field has evolved over the years, the 20 years, 25 years, and, how it's really moving to promoting a more compassionate and respectful approach. And I'd love to have you kind of share just a little bit of what you see in the field and how that's evolving.
Yeah. And what's interesting, Brooke, is that I went to the Cal ABA conference here in Pasadena this year.
Mhm.
And it was wonderful because the ABA field is really developing and evolving. And what I really liked that they did is they had a panel of adults on the last day they were neurodiverse, many with autism, many who had had therapy, ABA therapy in the past. But I really like how they were part of the panel. They were sharing what was meaningful for them, what was challenging for them.
Mhm.
And they had a voice.
Yeah.
They had a voice at the conference. And I thought that was fantastic to hear their perspective, to
Mhm.
get their insight into therapy
Mhm.
and what we need as clinicians to be aware of. So they were speaking to us directly, and it was wonderful. And one of the takeaways that I had from that is how important it is not to focus so much on compliance or obedience training for children with autism.
Mhm.
There has to be a careful balance there of targeting, of course we want kids to be able to get along well in the world and to follow directions, but there has to be a balance and we have to teach them advocacy skills to
Mhm.
self-advocate for their own safety. We don't want them thinking anytime somebody tells them to do something that they have to do it. That's not a very safe behavior for them to have. They have to recognize where their boundaries are.
Mhm.
If they're uncomfortable, to say, no, thank you. I don't like that. I don't like that touch. I need a break. This is feeling hard for me. I need help. So that's very, very important. So I think there's a shift to hearing the voices of the neurodiverse population and also really recognizing, even if a client is limited in their communication skills, recognizing assent versus dissent.
Mhm.
Meaning, like what I shared with you, I was really tuned into my client. I could tell when he was done and
Yeah.
he wasn't being non-compliant. He was tired.
Right.
And I had to be flexible and recognize, I could see in his body language, he was with me, he was involved. So that's giving me the green light to continue. But I could see also when it was too much for him and he was shutting down. Then I have to see, okay, now he's giving me nonverbal cues. And I think that the field is evolving in that way. We're recognizing verbal and nonverbal assent and dissent, meaning I want to do this, I don't want to do this, I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable. And we're responding and we're teaching more self-advocacy, empowerment, and then hearing, the neurodiverse voice.
That's
It's
huge.
important. That's huge.
It's huge.
Mhm.
Right. It's a huge shift. And I think it's so important. And I think it just is going to lead to, building that trusting relationship, and that the students know that they're going to be honored and respected, and if they've had too much or they're tired, that's going to be heard and responded to. And,
Yeah.
that's how you increase that motivation the next time.
Yeah. And I want to share a little story, Brooke, because this is a memory that I have. Before I came to TAG, I was working in a school district, or I was consulting with a school district. And there was one of the one-to-ones who I could tell she was very focused on compliance. And so there was a little girl in the class who had autism, and she was working on a puzzle, and it was break time. So it was free time.
Mm-hmm.
And she was so industrious. She was working really hard. And she wasn't my client, but I remember I was impressed with how focused she was on this puzzle. She wanted to get it done. Then the teacher gave a countdown and gave a warning and said, okay, in 3 minutes, it's going to be time to put things away. And then we're going to do math and in 2 minutes. So the teacher was doing everything right. She was giving those transitional warnings. The girl was trying to finish the puzzle and she just couldn't get it all done in time.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, it's time to transition to math. And I kind of was watching to see what was going to happen. And the emphasis was compliance. And so even though the little girl, she didn't want to put it away because she wanted to finish it, that she was physically motored and hand over hand, her body was leaned against the aid and she was forced to put it away. And she was protesting. She was very upset.
Mm.
And it just hurt my heart to see that,
Mm.
because I thought there could have been a little bit of a middle ground. Like we could have slowed down. And in my mind, what I would have done is I would have slowed down and said, you had worked so hard on this puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, look at what you've done. You are working so hard. I wonder if you'd like to finish it. Maybe we can put a Post-it or a sticker on there so none of the other kids can touch it. We won't put it away. We won't clean it up, but we'll put it on the shelf. And then when it's free time again, you can finish it.
Yeah.
And just something like that, where there could have been a middle ground where, yes, she still needs to do math, but
Right.
maybe we could have acknowledged how hard she worked on the puzzle and taught her how to problem solve and maybe how to communicate or ask for help. Maybe you can ask me for help. What can we do to solve this?
Right.
To me, that would have been a compassionate way to work on follow through.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did give feedback to the special ed director, he was the assistant principal. I just said, you might want to, because I felt like it was at a place for me to share, but I wanted to make sure that that the aide was getting supported and knowing, I think in her heart, she was trying to do a good job. She was thinking, I've been told I need to work on compliance.
Right.
But we could have worked on it and still respected and honored the effort that the child was showing.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's so great that the field has evolved in that area, especially related to compliance. Because I know that was a big part of the traditional ABA, and it seems like the field is really listening and understanding too. There's just so many facets where our clients are experiencing their sensory experiences and confusion or uncertainty, and there's a lot. It's very complex. It's not always so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's so important that we as professionals take a good look at that and really consider what the individual situation is telling us.
Right. Because it could be, for example, where let's say you want a child to put on their seatbelt and they don't want to put on their seatbelt. And you're focused on compliance thinking, they need to put on the seatbelt for safety. But then maybe the more you get to understand, because I've had this experience with a client, seatbelt, because the mother was so attuned and took the time to really listen to what was going on, the child was eventually, not easy to communicate, but over time was able to say it's hurting them. It was actually cutting and like rubbing against their skin, very uncomfortable. And then they problem solved and they were able to put something there to prevent the pain that the child was experiencing with the seatbelt. So sometimes, it's really important to really seek to understand what's happening? Why are they avoiding that? Is there a sensory issue, or is there, is it painful for them? Is it noisy? Is there some kind of discomfort? Do they lack maybe the skills and they're feeling uncomfortable or incompetent? So it's wonderful when a child's able to verbally communicate. Unfortunately, a lot of times they're not able to let us know. And so that can be challenging.
Right.
But we have to be really careful when, looking at forced compliance, because there may be reasons why a child is showing some refusal.
Right. And I would say even add to that you might be missing out on opportunities to support that self-advocacy and self-awareness and, things that you can work on through, being curious.
Right. Yeah.
So, not just, as you mentioned earlier, those are areas that are so important and they lead to new opportunities in the future. So I think that's so.
And it builds trust. I think it builds trust when the child sees that you're tuned into them and you're seeking to understand what's the why behind this.
Right.
Yeah, it's all, you have to have a balance.
Hmm. Absolutely.
You got to have limits as well. You got to have limits and some structure as well. So you never want to go too far in one direction or the other. You got to
Yeah.
have that balance because, again, the child is going to have to learn how to accept limits and boundaries, but you want to make sure that they're developmentally appropriate as well.
Right. Absolutely. That's a really good point. Okay. I want to wrap up our conversation. If listeners could take away one thing from our conversation, what do you think would be the most important piece?
Well, I just want everyone to know that there is hope for your child. There is hope and there's flexibility. So you can find a program if you're interested in ABA, you can find a program that you're comfortable with. And if you want an approach that is more naturalistic and you would like to be involved in that, I would seek for that. I would reach out and find someone who's willing to use a more naturalistic approach. But I think the number one takeaway is there is hope. You can be involved in your child's growth and development using fun, everyday activities that are part of your routine. And you can target all sorts of goals, communication, social behavior, in just using everyday, normal, developmentally appropriate activities with your child.
Yeah, I love it. That's beautiful. Thank you. And before we wrap up, I want to make sure everybody has a chance to hear about how they can reach you. And if they want to learn more about your Naturalistic ABA programs, and if you want to share just a little bit about the contact information, and we'll, of course, include that in the show notes too.
Sure. Yeah. I work at Therapeutic Approach to Growth here in San Diego, California. You can contact Therapeutic Approach to Growth, or you can email me at the letter J for Jackie, Zaldua, Zaldua at tagforgrowth.com. And I also, every Thursday at 11 o'clock, I do a Zoom meeting. So I'm available to connect. I have a little PowerPoint and I go over what our program looks like. So I do that every Thursday for any family that's interested in learning more.
That's fabulous. And that's live. So families can ask questions and share a little bit. And that's also Pacific Standard Time, right? Because you're in San Diego. So that's fabulous. Great. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. This was a wonderful conversation. I loved kind of thinking about all those amazing memories too, and of our events. And it was fun to go down memory lane together. And
oh, yes. I know I was remembering a lot of things I'd forgotten. So yeah, I forgot about the snow. That was
yes. Yes. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here today and sharing about your programs, and I look forward to getting this information out there.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back there. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll leave echoes in every place I find. I break the mold with the rebels run. I'm a hurricane of free, born mine.
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.